Hello ladies and gentlemen, I am the Omniviewer, and today we're going to take a look into the exciting world of copyright law! Won't that be fun? If there's one movie I've wanted to see remade for a very long time, it's King Kong vs. Godzilla. Don't get me wrong, the original is a classic, but it does have a lot of problems. For starters, that Kong suit is terrible. One of the worst in the whole genre. And that ending is so darn ambiguous as to who actually won. For the record though, I say that's King Kong beating a hasty retreat. A rematch is long overdue, and you've got to wonder why Toho never bothered trying. It turns out they did try remaking it once. The original plan was for a new King Kong vs. Godzilla to be part of the Heisei series, particularly as a follow-up to Godzilla vs. Biollante. However, when Toho went to get the rights to the Eighth Wonder of the World from Universal, the price tag was so incredibly high that there wouldn't have been enough money left over to actually make the movie. So that dream died pretty quickly. For a brief time, Toho considered using one of their original kaiju, Mechani-Kong, who basically serves the same purpose as Mechagodzilla before Mechagodzilla was even a thought. He had premiered in King Kong Escapes, so they thought they were pretty safe using him. They were apparently wrong. Universal stepped in again and said that Mechani-Kong was too similar to King Kong for Toho to consider the robot its intellectual property, and therefore they can't use him anymore either. This pretty much caused Toho to give up on the idea, and a remake of King Kong vs. Godzilla was pretty much considered nothing more than a pipe dream. Until 2015. It was in September of that year when Legendary announced they would be bringing their new King Kong prequel, tentatively titled Kong Skull Island, from Universal over to Warner Brothers, who still owned the rights to the Gareth Edwards Godzilla. Immediately, rumors began spreading that the reason for this move was because a new King Kong vs. Godzilla was in the works. Rumors that are pretty easy to believe. Given that Legendary had left Warner Brothers for Universal pretty much as soon as Godzilla was finished, the fact that they would go from Universal back to Warner Brothers with another giant monster property seems kind of random unless a crossover was somehow in the works. While this announcement is certainly exciting, it's also left a lot of people confused. If King Kong belongs to Universal, how is Legendary getting away with bringing this movie to Warner Brothers? Why didn't Universal do anything to try and stop it? Well, it turns out Universal can't do a darn thing. Long ago, they had actually gone to great lengths to prove that they didn't own King Kong. This is going to get very, very complicated, so strap yourselves in, everyone. This is one of the most convoluted legal thrillers you're ever gonna hear. Our story begins in the 1960s, when Marion C. Cooper caught wind of the aforementioned crossover with Godzilla. This led to Cooper learning that Universal had actually been making quite a killing licensing Kong for commercials and by manufacturing products with his likeness. This came as a surprise to Cooper because he had always assumed, being Kong's original creator, that he owned the exclusive rights. Cooper brought Universal to court to try and prove this, and then everything went downhill. Cooper claimed to have documents and letters that would have proven beyond the shadow of a doubt that in the original agreement Kong was labeled as exclusively his, but he never was able to produce them. It's quite possible they never existed in the first place, but either way, that's what his case was riding on, and without them, there was no case. As such, the courts ruled in favor of the studio. Universal did indeed own most of the rights to King Kong. It was determined, however, that Cooper did own the exclusive rights to the original book, which had been published in 1932 and was therefore considered the source material. This suited Universal just fine, since hardly anyone knows or cares that the book exists. Well, did you? So it would remain until the 1970s, which is where our saga continues. In the 1970s, Dino De Laurentiis made his now infamous remake of King Kong, but he made it in Paramount, not Universal. It seems that Paramount had gone to RKO Studios, who had produced the original film, to get the rights, instead of going to Universal. And of course, Universal didn't like this. They brought RKO to court, on the grounds that a verbal agreement existed between them, which granted Universal exclusive rights to the Great Ape. If this sounds like a flimsy reason to sue somebody, that's because it is. So RKO countersued Universal for being big fat liars. At the same time, Dino De Laurentiis sued Universal for disrupting production of his film and therefore inhibiting his ability to work. And on top of it all, Richard Cooper, son of Marion C. and now head of his father's estate, also decided to sue Universal in hopes that in all of this chaos he might finally win back the rights of his father's creation to the family. Universal was in deep trouble. It was coming under fire from 3 sides and it needed a miracle in order to get out. And that miracle came when Universal's lawyers made a shocking discovery. You remember the book, which we said was the source material that belonged to the Cooper estate? Well, in the time since that verdict had been reached, the copyright had expired, meaning the book was now in the public domain. Now Universal had a secret weapon. After settling with De Laurentiis out of court, they brought the evidence before the presiding judge, the Honorable Manuel Real. Their new argument went as follows. Since the source material was now in the public domain, that meant King Kong was in the public domain, and therefore there was no reason for any of this nonsense. Judge Real agreed, and the verdict went as follows. Since the source material was now in the public domain, that meant any studio could produce its own version of King Kong without having to pay money to RKO or Universal. The caveat being that any new production could not infringe upon elements that originated in the 1933 film. That may sound a little confusing, so let me put it this way. Anyone can make a movie based on Rudyard Kipling's The Jungle Book, since that book is in the public domain. But the Disney version of The Jungle Book belongs exclusively to Disney. If you make a version of The Jungle Book that includes the song The Bare Necessities, and it's not produced by Disney, you're in trouble. In a rare double whammy verdict, Judge Real decreed that the character of King Kong did indeed belong to the Cooper estate, although this did not change the public domain status of the book, and so Richard Cooper had won back the rights to his father's greatest legacy, and then proceeded to sell those rights back to Universal for huge wads of cash money, making the whole thing completely pointless. Basically, this trial is the reason why Legendary can bring Skull Island over to Warner Brothers for a Godzilla crossover. So long as this new film is different enough from the 1933 film, and based on everything we've read so far, it most likely is, there's really nothing Universal can do to stop it. However, this still begs the question of why Toho was denied access. After all, their version of King Kong bears very little resemblance to the original. I bet some of you may already have a theory as to why, and it's based on the fact that, well, public domain status doesn't always translate between nations. For example, the character of Fu Manchu is public domain in America, but he's not public domain in England. Now that's a very good guess, and I would normally agree, if not for the next part of this sordid tale that blows it right out of the water. Flash forward to the 1980s when Universal decides to take Nintendo to court. The charge was that the character of Donkey Kong was too similar to the character of King Kong for Nintendo to keep using. Judge Manuel Real was once again presiding, which gave Universal confidence they'd win again, until the judge proved to have a very sharp memory. Universal's claim contradicted the ruling they had fought so hard to get in the 70s, which said that King Kong was in the public domain, and therefore no one had to pay anyone any money to use him or a character like him, so long as the original film was not infringed upon in that particular work. And literally the only similarity between Donkey Kong and King Kong is that they're both primates. Trying to prove that one is a copy of the other is ludicrous. But hang on, didn't Universal cover all those bases when they'd gotten the rights from the Cooper estate in the wake of that trial? They thought they had, but there was one key element missing. Universal had not acquired the trademark rights from the Cooper estate, because the Cooper estate never had them to begin with. If Universal had gotten those rights and was therefore able to trademark the word Kong, then they might have had a leg to stand on. But since they didn't, well, I'm amazed they weren't laughed out of court on principle. As you can imagine, Universal lost. In fact, they didn't just lose, they had to cover Nintendo's legal fees. Now, since Nintendo is also a Japanese company and the public domain rules apply to them, I really don't know why it didn't apply to Toho as well. Well, not that it matters anymore. I'm sure Universal's executives are going to be really upset that they won't be getting any money from Skull Island, but in the end, they have no one to blame but the people who preceded them. There you go. I hope that cleared things up. Until such time as we meet again, this is the Omniviewer, signing off. Oh, and just to make things even more confusing, the DVD of the original film is actually distributed by Warner Brothers, not Universal. There's no end to the confusion.